Behold his mighty hand!
Most people are familiar with the biblical story of the Exodus, where Moses led the 12 tribes, as they were called, to settle in what is now Israel. One interesting detail of this story, which is often overlooked, is that one of those tribes had members that also went north, settling in places like Greece and Sardinia, which also retains the root word Dan in its name. In the book of Numbers, the tribe of Dan is portrayed as the second largest Israelite tribe, after Judah. That said, Danoi, used 138 times in the Iliad, are Greek people that Homer identifies as the besiegers of Troy, the Mycenaeans. Their capital was called Mycenae.
Could the Danites, who lived in Canaan, modern-day Israel, really be related to the Danoi, who lived in Mycenae, modern-day Greece? In Homer's Odyssey, we discovered that the Danoi are migrant people. Even the word Odyssey is literally associated with these migrants. Second, we learned that they are mighty warriors that chase Helen by ship to Troy. Even the great Achilles fights in their ranks. Third, they are expert craftsmen who build the famous wooden horse that fools the Trojans. In the Bible, we find a similar profile for the Danites. We first hear about them in the story of Moses when he leaves Egypt with his 12 tribes heading to the Holy Land. Moses partitions Canaan and gives a portion to each tribe. Judah and his people, the Judahites, get Judea. This tribe later becomes the Jews. The mysterious Danites decide not to take their share and instead are the only tribe to migrate. They head north to a town called Laish, which they conquer and rename Dan, modern-day Tel Dan. The most famous of the Danites is Samson, a mighty warrior, more similar to the Greek Hercules than other Hebrew prophets. We also learned that the Danites are expert craftsmen, chosen to build the sacred gold-laden Ark of the Covenant. During the Exodus from Egypt, some Danites traveled by land to Canaan, while others migrated north by ship to the Aegean. The Danites were seafarers. After leaving Egypt with Moses, some of the Danites may have migrated north by sea and ended up in an area of the Aegean called Mycenae, to become the Danoi written about in Homer's Iliad. But can we find archaeological evidence of this migration? Amazingly enough, right after the Jews leave Egypt, vast quantities of gold mysteriously appear in Mycenae, in what are called shaft tombs. To add to the striking discovery, archaeologists believe this gold came from Egypt. But do we have a reason to think the gold came via the Danites? When the Danites helped build the Ark of the Covenant, they covered it in gold, so we know that they are expert goldsmiths. It would make sense that they would have brought their craft and their precious metal to the Aegean.
Nowhere in its long journey to the Black Sea does the river Danube look more impressive than here at Budapest, the capital city of Hungary. The Danube is the second longest river in Europe, stretching from its estuary in the Black Sea to its source in Germany's Black Forest. Widely regarded as one of the most beautiful cities in Europe, Budapest can trace its roots back to prehistoric times. It's an intriguing thought, as some scholars have suggested, that the Israelite tribe of Dan incorporated their name into some of the geographical features they encountered on their travels. Starting with Tel Dan in Israel, and in the course of their migrations, the great rivers, the Dnieper, the Don, or even the Danube. Running through the heart of the continent, the Danube has provided a readily available route for armies and all manner of travelers over many centuries, including the lost tribes as they moved westward across the continent.
If it is the case that the lost tribes of our story are represented by the Scythians, their presence in the region of the Danube is recorded by an impressive collection of artifacts held here in the Hungarian National Museum.
The Scythians built enormous burial mounds above their princes' graves and buried their dead with exquisite golden objects. Their precious metalwork was the zenith of nomadic art. This exhibition displays some of the most significant relics of Scythian art and culture and tells us something of the daily life of these people. The Scythians were renowned not only for their military prowess, but for their advanced culture and craftsmanship skills. The Danube was to provide the artery that would take the Scythian tribes into the heart of Europe. By the 6th century BC, successive waves of Scythian attacks overtook much of pre-Roman Iron Age Poland and Germany. In the years since the end of the Cold War, what was East Berlin has undergone an extensive restoration program. The Brandenburg Gate is the architectural icon, not just for the city itself, but for the German people. The city centre has been returned to its former grandeur. Nowhere is this reconstruction more apparent than on this small island in the River Spree, on which stand the country's great museums. They hold many priceless archaeological artifacts, including those which tell us something of the Scythian presence in Europe. While the Scythian invasions were accompanied by much violence, there was another, more sophisticated side to their culture. In 1882, a hoard of Scythian treasure was found at the Iron Age archaeological site of Wetterfeld on the German-Polish border. Some of the wonderful gold objects found there are on display here at the Altes Museum. Taking pride of place in the collection is this golden fish and sword found at Witoskowo. The exquisite craftsmanship of these items bear testimony to the advanced metalworking skills employed at that time. Historians claim that the Scythians were the ancestors of the Anglo-Saxons who invaded Britain after the Roman withdrawal. The historian Sharon Turner, in his History of the Anglo-Saxons, says, "The Anglo-Saxons, Lowland Scots, Normans, Danes, Norwegians, Swedes, Germans, Dutch, Belgians, Lombards, and Franks have all sprung from that great fountain of the human race, which we have distinguished by the terms Scythian, German, or Gothic." The Roman historian Tacitus and the geographer Ptolemy named the River Elbe in the lower half of the Jutland Peninsula as the places inhabited by the Angles and Saxons before they came to Britain. It's also interesting to note that the British historian Nennius, in his account of the arrival of Hengist and Horsa in England, states that messengers were sent to Scythia for reinforcements. It is therefore possible to trace our Anglo-Saxon ancestors back not only to northern Europe, but to South Russia, and finally to Media, where the Israelites were placed in captivity. The treasures found at Sutton Hoo are to be seen on display at the British Museum, where this impressive helmet takes pride of place. Other items of significance in the collection include the king's shield and sword. These magnificent silver bowls clearly show the Star of David, which suggest a Middle Eastern connection. The native British came to be made up not only of the Cimmerian Celts and Scythian Anglo-Saxons, but also Vikings and Normans. Anthropologists, such as E.A. Freeman of Trinity College, Oxford, in his Origin of the English Nation, describes the native Britons as a union of various tribes of the same stock, which passed over from the old Teutonic mainland to grow up as a new people.
The Encyclopedia Americana records the Scythians arrived in the region of South Russia about 700 BC. Assyrian documents place their appearance on the shores of Lake Urmia, just south of Armenia, in the time of King Sargon, around 700 BC, a date which closely corresponds with that of the first establishment of the first group of Scythians in southern Russia, at the very time that the 10 tribes of Israel were fleeing from the final Assyrian invasion. The Encyclopedia Britannica states the terms Saka or Saki and Scyths or Scyths are regarded as synonymous. The famous Greek historian Herodotus wrote that the Persians called the Scythians Saki. In rabbinic literature, the kingdom of Ashkenaz was first associated with the Scythian region, then later with the Slavic territories, and from the 11th century onward with Northern Europe, and was centered on the Rhineland in what is now the westernmost part of Germany. The oldest Nordic historians write that the Nordic and Germanic peoples trekked from the Middle East to North Europe under the leadership of a priest chieftain, Odin. The Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl, internationally famous for the Kon-Tiki expedition, wrote in his final unpublished book that the ancestors of the Nordic and Germanic people came from Azerbaijan, which is near modern Turkey. Thank you for watching this presentation. My name is Robert SEPEHR. I'm an independent anthropologist. Please share this video if you learned something today. I rely on word of mouth and greatly appreciate the positive reviews, comments, and would like to remind you to subscribe to my channel to be notified of new video uploads. Thank you to those who have been supporting me through Atlantean Gardens, the nonprofit organization that disseminates my work. Please continue pursuing truth no matter where it leads, and I will see you next time.
Is the Antichrist from the tribe of Dan? Some Jews are actually looking for their false Messiah to be a son of Dan, not the son of David. In a recent blog post, prominent Israeli rabbi gave his opinion on the ancestry of the Messiah according to his Jewish sources. Unlike Christians who believe the Messiah was the son of David, this rabbi is looking for a son of Dan. Interestingly, many Christians, including many of the early church fathers, believed the Antichrist to be from the tribe of Dan, that he would then be a son of Dan. Exactly what this rabbi is looking for in a Messiah. That's just frightening. Imagine the description, if you're looking for the traits of the Messiah, would actually be the traits of the Antichrist. Let's start this video with the reasons why some Christians expect the anti-Messiah or Antichrist to be from the Jewish tribe of Dan. First, in Revelation 7:5-7, when discussing the 144,000 Jewish men who were saved after seeing Jesus coming on the clouds, there are no members of the tribe of Dan. None. Instead, the half-tribe of Manasseh are substituted. So why is the tribe of Dan missing from that number who are saved? It's not explained. In this previous video, however, we indicated that if you read the meaning of the tribe names in the order that they're presented, it indicates a message, an end-time message. This is pretty incredible, and we certainly recommend you watch it. A link is down in the description. Second, at the other end of the Bible, in Genesis 49:17, this is what Jacob said about his son Dan. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a viper by the path that bites the horse's heels, so that the rider falls backwards. That is not a very complimentary description for a prophecy. Being called a serpent like Satan, or biting the heels like Satan bit Jesus' heels prophetically. Also, it's just an evil-sounding prophecy. Nothing positive about it. Now, in the Hebrew language, that particular type of serpent that's mentioned in this verse is a kriates, or a horned serpent, the color of sand, almost invisible to the eye, and its bite is poisonous, a deadly deceiver hiding in the sand. I mean, again, this just sounds so evil. Samson is the most famous of those who came from the tribe of Dan, someone who was deceived himself by Delilah. Dan is also famous for establishing a pagan worship of a golden calf in their main city, 1 Kings 12:25-33. However, none of this explicitly says the Antichrist is genetically from the tribe of Dan, nor even from the region of Dan. However, several of the early church fathers began espousing this idea. The first explicit mention of an Antichrist from Dan comes from the writings of Irenaeus in about 150 AD. In Against Heresies 530.2, Irenaeus notes that Antichrist will be a Danite, but that he will claim the Roman power. He also suggests he might have the name Titan, which happens to add up to 666 in Greek Dramatia. So it's a fitting name, he says, for it contains a certain outward appearance of vengeance and of inflicting merited punishment, because he pretends that he vindicates the oppressed, Against Heresies 530.3. The oppressed here are probably the Jews. Somewhat surprisingly, Irenaeus gives only two scriptural passages to support the Antichrist Danite origin. One is Revelation 7, about the 144,000 that we mentioned above. The other is Jeremiah 8:16-17. The snorting of their horses is heard from Dan. At the sound of the neighing of their stallions, the whole land quakes. They come and devour the land, all that fills it. For behold, I am sending among you serpents and adders that cannot be charmed, and they shall bite you. So this again references serpents and adders, snakes. Danites never invaded the rest of Israel, so this must be some kind of future prophecy. Now, the Jeremiah verse is also interesting because in context of the rest of the chapter, it speaks of false prophets. Another very early church father, Hippolytus from 200 AD, says the Jews will be deceived by this impostor and receive him as their Messiah because he will accomplish great things on their behalf. He will gather them back into the land, raise up their ruined temple, and restore their kingdom, at least temporarily. Hippolytus said, "The deceiver seeks to liken himself in all things to the Son of God. As Jesus was the Lion from the tribe of Judah," referring to Jacob's blessing on Judah in Genesis 49:9, Antichrist will be the Lion from the tribe of Dan, referring to Moses' blessing on the tribe of Dan in Deuteronomy 33:22. Dan is a lion's club that leaps from Bashan, from On Christ and Antichrist, chapter 6. But this is all just very weak evidence in my mind. Nothing is jumping out to me that says this has to be the way it is. But what if the Antichrist isn't genetically from Dan, but simply was born in the region which the Golan Heights has today? The Golan Heights includes extreme northern Israel and southern Syria. Micah 5:5 refers to the Antichrist being from Assyria, and he, speaking of Jesus, will be their peace when the Assyrian comes into our land and treads on our palaces. Here the Antichrist refers to someone from the area of Assyria, maybe the Danite region of Assyria. That makes more sense, as the Antichrist is referred to as the king of the north. And that region, of course, is north of Israel. So, is the Antichrist from Dan? Well, maybe, maybe not. But what if the Jews are looking for their Messiah to come from that tribe or region? It is still dangerous. Rabbi Ephraim Palanov, a teacher and author who covers Jewish subjects that are misunderstood or not normally discussed, here are his discussions. The work of Moshiach, and that means Messiah, is done in Israel, building the third temple, the war of Gog and Magog. In this regard, the Messiah is usually identified with the tribe of Judah, as per Jacob's blessings on his sons. Implicit in that blessing of Judah is that the dynastic monarchy will come through the tribe of Judah, personified by King David. The scepter shall not depart from Yehudah, nor the ruler's staff between his feet. So the tribute shall come to him, and the homage of peoples be his. Rabbi Palanov points to the blessing of Dan as another more emphatic messianic prophecy. Dan shall be a serpent by the road, we've already seen this, a viper by the path that bites the horse's heels so that his rider is thrown backward. Genesis 49:17. In gematria, Hebrew numerology, snake, Nakash, equals 359, which precisely equals the gematria of the word Moshiach, or Messiah. Wow, to me that is just dangerous stuff, using something like gematria in a way it's not indicated in the Bible to indicate a snake might be equal with Messiah. Rabbi Palanov goes on. In Kabbalistic sources, this is the meaning of Isaiah's description of the great final battle between the Nakash, Bariah, and the Nakash, Akalatan, the straight serpent and the twisted serpent. He's quoting what he believes to be Isaiah 27:1. The former is Mashiach, the later is the embodiment of evil that will be destroyed at the end of days. Actually, and this is Nelson speaking here again, both of these terms clearly refer to Leviathan in Isaiah 27, which is either Satan or the Antichrist. Again, this is a case of attributing Antichrist attributes to the Messiah. The Messiah they're waiting for. No wonder so many in Israel are going to be deceived if they're following rabbis like this guy. And as we indicated in the previous videos, prominent rabbis in Israel are claiming to already be speaking with the man they think is their Messiah. Some think it's Shlomo ben Yehuda. His family originally came from Syria, so this is possible that he has some tribe of Dan connections to him. Others think it's an unknown, yet to be revealed person. But either way, it's a false Messiah. But that doesn't make him the Antichrist. The Bible states that in the beginning of the birth pangs period, many will come claiming to be the Messiah, Matthew 24:4-5. So just because a person is announced as Messiah in Israel, it does not mean he is the Antichrist. The one who sits in the temple of God and declares himself to be God, that is the Antichrist. But what is the latest news with this guy, Shlomo ben Yehuda, the famous Yanuka rabbi? Click right here to keep watching and discover what an Israeli Christian pastor knows and thinks about this rabbi and the claim that some make that he's the false Messiah of Israel. Inside information from Israel, so to speak. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.
Thanks to
Virtually every documented civilization start their history with stories of godlike men who were superior in longevity, strength, height, and civility. They interject themselves into the primitive cultures with invaluable knowledge. In this episode, we will be discussing a hidden connection between the mysteries using historical and biblical evidence. So stay tuned and strap on your boots because we are live right now with the Midnight Ride.
And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome once again to the Midnight Ride. It is our great honor to welcome each and every one of you into the Puritan Barn for another episode of the Midnight Ride. Tonight, the tribe of Dan is our focus. What has it meant in biblical history? What has it mean, its meaning in Bible prophecy, and what does it mean to us today? These are things, as John unpacks this information tonight, that you're going to realize we really need to know. So get ready. It all starts right now because we are now
Live. What's up, guys? It's so good to be here from the Puritan Barn once again. Let us know where you're from in the chat. Let us know how you're doing, and comment if you're watching this after we are live. We're so excited to be here to do this. This is going to be, in my opinion, of course, you know, every show that I feel like that I research and I do gets better and better. And I think this one is going to be by far the best one that I've ever been able to pull off. And, you know, you guys have seen me grow over the years. Some of you guys have seen shows from 2016, even some from 2010. And you've seen a lot of different things go on here. And so this is a culmination of a lot of stuff. So I'm really excited about it. So please stay tuned, and we'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Mainstream companies put dangerous chemicals in their products that contribute to disease and disability. This is why it's so important that we take care in the products that we consume. The skin is the largest organ in your body, and it is the covering to your temple. Our sponsor tonight is Sugar and Spice Soap Company. They create all natural and biblically clean soaps and beauty products. They even have a soap for Midnight Ride listeners. Use coupon code NYSTV to receive 10% off all your purchases. Link in the description. If this is true, then our country is in a lot of trouble.
We would have these trips, these special trips.
But he said, my daddy takes the bodies to the grocery store and he grinds them up and puts it in the hamburger. And nobody ever knows it.
How can kids 6, 8, 10 years old be describing rituals that come from a book like the Book of the Dead?
It's hard to get your mind around people being capable of this kind of evil.
All right, guys, we are back. Thank you guys so much for checking that out. If you're interested in any of that, the links are in the description. Also, I want to give a shout out to Truther Fit. We have the Midnight Ride mugs that are our collector's edition, our first edition Midnight Ride mugs. And they are right now, if you guys use the code #ToraHead, #TORAHHEAD. Use that. The actual is actually down in there. Use that and you get 50% off the Midnight Ride mugs. Get them before they're gone. I think that they don't have that many left. They'll probably be out here within the next month or two. So make sure you get those. That will be the last run of this first edition before we introduce the next one. So make sure you guys check that out. David, I know you guys got stuff going on over on FOJC. Let me know what you guys got going on.
Tomorrow night on FOJC Radio, Sunday Night Live, 7 p.m. Central Time, our third episode of our Cities Lost in Time series. We will be focusing on Tanakh Titlian, the city of Cain, 7 p.m. Eastern. It will be frosty, I guarantee it.
Very good. Looking forward to it. I know that we've talked about that before in our Book of Enoch, and it was just an amazing study, and it really opens up a lot about, and even really kind of coincides a little bit what we're talking about tonight. So it'll be awesome.
It really does, absolutely.
Very good. So David, if you are ready, I'm ready.
I say let's ride.
All right, guys. So tonight, we're going to be talking about the connection between Og of Bashan, the last king of the giants, the tribe of Dan, who is also called the serpent in the path, serpent in the way in the scriptures, and we're going to be talking about the reference to them and the blue buds, and we're going to be talking about these connections through the Bible and through historical means. Also, we're going to be discussing the connection between Atlantis and the new Atlantis, America, and all of these things tie in really interestingly and almost in a way that makes so much sense with all the stories that we hear throughout time. And for some of those of you that haven't heard of Blue Bloods, some of you who are maybe younger that have not heard this term, this is a common term that they would use to describe people who were of royal stock or nobility. And here's just a few clips from some old movies referencing this right here. So.
If you were born blue bloods like your husband?
Flinging up skyscrapers, his wife's a proper blue blood. I'll give you a clue.
Darius, we can't keep the princess waiting. Blue blood, you know.
So you see these references to blue bloods, and you know, for me, I've always wondered about this, what blue bloods actually means. And so through this study, through finding out the study, we ran into a lot of stuff. And like I've said before, this is a culmination of a lot of things that we've studied. And I feel like I've been able to bring this together in a puzzle in a way that maybe is relatable and some of you guys can grasp onto, because this story that we hear throughout all of these legends, whether it be through Plato of the Atlanteans, the Tuatha De Danann from the Irish, Incans, Mayans, they all have this story of these Viking-like men, men with long blonde hair, red hair, or blue eyes that come, and they're like gods, and they teach them civility. They teach them all of these different things as they come to their civilization. And this right here is just a short portion of a Manly P. Hall lecture. And Manly P. Hall was a 33rd degree Freemason and had a lot of literature on the occult. And so we're going to check out a little bit of what he says, and then we're going to tie it in with scripture and see where all this stuff fits in, because there is a huge deception here if we're not careful.
Now, this also causes us to have another little interlude here, which I think we should give a thought to. We are told by Plato and several other historians of the time that various agencies, various merchants, travelers, explorers from Atlantis visited other lands. And among those who visited other lands were the priests of the Atlanteans, those who worshiped the great golden serpent. Serpent worship was one of the oldest religions of the world. Now, these various missionaries, shall we say, went to primitive people, as we send missionaries today to underprivileged or gradually evolving groups. And these missionaries set up various institutions in the distant parts of the empire, the parts that were not actually destroyed by the destruction of the Atlantean centerland. Now, it seems to me, and I realize that this is hypothetical, but it seems to me that this explains a series of legends and myths which are of interest.
So, obviously, when he's talking about here, we're talking about little mystery schools being placed all over the place and little civilizations being set up all across primitive people. Now, at one point in time, post-flood, most stories, especially of native people to America and other stories, there's people that live underground, and then there's these beings that when they come up, because the flood had ravaged the earth, they teach them these civilized acts. They teach them the laws, they teach them how to act as a civilization in a city, they teach them the ways of money, and all of these different ideas they teach them. And what we're seeing here is a same old story across every single civilization, and it's pretty amazing. David, do you have anything that you'd like to add here before we watch a little more?
No, you go right ahead, John.
Okay, we're gonna, at any point you want me to pause this, we're gonna pause it. And this is Manly P. Hall kind of giving us more civilizations that tell this same story, and a couple of the ones that they talk about here we're going to kind of dig down deep into, because there's some symbols here and some things here that we do not want to miss. And so here we go.
We are told, for example, that the people of Chaldea and Babylonia were very primitive, that they had not yet discovered the use of fire, that they did not know how to cook food, they did not know how to keep records, they had no medical knowledge, they had no laws to live by and no governments except tribal communes. And in the midst of all this time, while they were living along the shores of the sea, one day something strange happened. A being came out of the sea. this being whom they called Oannes had the body of a fish and the head of a human being, and wore on his head the head of a fish on end. If you see the old pictures, you realize that his hat was what we call today a mitre.
I wanted to pause it here for just a second, David, because this is the story we talked about before. This is the story of the modern day kings. They say that they derive from a fish god. This is why we have the fisher kings, and we have the symbol of the fish that they have. Oannes being one of the most ancient, as well as kind of conformed into Dagon, Poseidon, and all of these creatures supposedly that came out of the ocean and had this progeny that are now our kings.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
The thing that, and you know, this is such an obvious, and for so many of our listeners, we've showed many times, and it's there for anyone that will look to see the mitre of Dagon upon the Pope's head. And Mr. Hall, when Mr. Hall passed away, I believe it was in 1980, I actually have his eulogy in the Scottish Rite Journal, and he was eulogized as Freemasonry's greatest philosopher. Now, he talked about these people being sent out as missionaries, and we've read before the quote from Alice Bailey, how she talked about infiltration, and it should be obvious, the infiltration there with the Pope and the mitre on his hat, but we have to realize that this infiltration, and we've read from the book of Alice Bailey, how it's come into our into the church, into the education systems. People are going to have to come to the place where they can discern the Spirit of God from the spirit of Antichrist, because the Antichrist is at work, not just in the Catholic Church, but in these religious establishments that are non-Catholic. You know, this is very much, this missionary effort is still very much underway.
That's for sure. And throughout this show, we're going to see an agenda that is taking place through all of this and how it applies to us now and in the future. So stay tuned. Here we go.
Which is practically exactly the shape of a fish's head. And this man who came out of the sea had scales. Now, scales could very well represent armor. He carried symbols with him. And he was a good man. And he came to these people. And he taught them. He gave them a written language. He gave them the knowledge of agriculture. He taught them astronomy and the mystery of the stars. He helped them to build a permanent government, introduced them into the mysteries of architecture and the building of cities. And he also taught them the mysteries of heaven and the ways of the gods, and taught them to live in obedience. And he told them that in due time he would return. Now, on the opposite side of the world, something else was happening. The people of Central America were living in a very primitive state. Some of them were cannibals. They had no homes except rude huts. They had no instruments except cut from stone. They did not know how to cook their food. They had no written language and no way of recording their history, no knowledge of any of these things. And while they lived in this primitive condition, a strange thing happened. An old man came to them, riding on the back of serpents. And he came to the shore, and he was welcomed by them, these peoples. And his name is preserved in the three great languages of the central culture of the period and time and place. To the Aztecs, he was Kukulkan. To the ones who lived around Palenque, he was Votan. And to the Mayas, he was Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. And this man came from the sea with a bonnet of wonderful plumes, almost like wings. And on his breast he carried a cross. He came to them, and they received him with regard and esteem. And he taught them all the things that Oannes had taught the Chaldeans. He helped them to establish a permanent way of life. He gave them the beginnings of a written language, the only written language in the Western Hemisphere. He gave them good government. And then he said, now I go away. But keep the rules that I've given you. And in due time, I will return. Now, these stories are interesting. There's nothing you can do but remember these strange stories. The same story exists in China. In China, the world's reformation, the restoration of humanity, was the result of a mysterious being who came out of a fish's mouth and, rising out of the sea, taught them the secrets of life. In India, Vishnu, in his first incarnation, is born from the fish's mouth. Everywhere the sea was the source of instruction. Something came from the sea. We can't dogmatize what it is, but it is interesting that at a remote period, certainly 8,000 or 10,000 years ago, if not more, doctrines and concepts and beliefs reached all parts of the world and are still reserved and preserved in all the mythologies, legends, and allegories of ancient peoples, and were recognized as the ultimate source of civilization.
All right, guys, so you hear it out of Manly P. Hall's mouth, and what he's saying there, regardless of what you think about Manly P. Hall, what he's saying there is absolutely true. All of these different civilizations tell this exact same story. And here I'm gonna focus in on a couple of these stories, a couple of these legends, a couple of these reasons that a lot of civilizations even have their worship or exist. First, we're going to talk about the German Übermensch. Now, Übermensch, Mensch is a word for man, and Über means like the best, the better man. And what they were trying to do in Germany, without talking too much about it, they were trying to look for this better man because they believed the stories of this serpent king type person, this blonde-headed, blue-eyed man that comes to their civilization and that lived longer, that was taller, bigger, stronger, and had better technology. They believed this story, and they wanted to find them, and they did everything in their power. A lot of people believe that they rested at Antarctica, and this is the reason that bases were set up like New Swabiland. This is the reason for Admiral Byrd's excavation or his journey to the South Pole, or at least what he was trying to get to the South Pole. And the reason that a lot of people died in these expeditions. And David, I know we've talked a lot about Admiral Byrd and his diaries and what he encountered there, and the story is all too similar, if not exactly the same, as these stories of these people we're talking about here.
The similarities are unmistakable, and there are many that would just dismiss Admiral Byrd as someone that became delusional. Everything about the man would mitigate against that he was anything but a crackpot, disillusional guy, and everything that Mr. Byrd claims he saw there and Antarctica, it just lines up so much with everything we've studied, with what's in Scripture and all of these ancient records. Therefore, I have to give Mr. Byrd a big check mark for credibility.
Agreed. And one of the most interesting stories of this that I think line up with Byrd's story, it lines up with the Atlantis story, and it probably has more recorded stuff about these people than any of the rest, is the Tuatha De Danann, and we're going to talk about them here. And so I've got some excerpts from an encyclopedia called, it's by John T. Cox, Celtic Culture, a historical encyclopedia, and I pulled some articles from pages 1693 to 1697 about this. And so I'm just going to read this to you guys. It says, the Tuatha De are often depicted as kings, queens, druids, bards, warriors, heroes, healers, and craftsmen who have supernatural powers. They dwell in the other world, but interact with humans and the human world. They are associated with the seed, prominent ancient burial mounds such as the Bruna and Bonnet, and they are entrances to other world realms. It has also been suggested that the Danann is a conflation of Dan, and the goddess name Anan. The name is also found in Danann, Damnan, which point to the original being Celtic, Dawn, meaning earth. Interesting here, huh? Especially in reference to Robert SEPEHR's video about Donald Trump, and also the video that we had done about Donald Trump about the Antichrist. It's really interesting because that word means earth or domain, and you have these little earth mounds that you see all over Ireland where they suppose fairies were coming out of, and we're going to start to understand why here in a second. So medieval texts about the Tuath Day were written by Christians, and sometimes they explain the Tuath Day as fallen angels who were neither wholly good nor wholly evil, and some of them were just basically they were they didn't really care. They were trying to not have the world destroyed, so they would share information, and which is kind of like what Admiral Byrd describes, and we'll talk about why here in a little while. And they were highly skilled in magic, but several writers acknowledged that at least some of them had been gods. The Tuath Day eventually became the Aes the seed folks or fairies of later folklore. However, Irish monks also began using the term Tuath Day to refer to the Israelites, with meaning people of God. They live in the other world, which is described as either a parallel world or a heavenly land beyond the sea or under the earth's surface. Many of them are associated with specific places in the landscape, especially the Seed Mountains, the ancient burial mounds and passage tombs, which are entrances to the otherworld realms. The Tuath Day can hide themselves with entrances to otherworld realms. The Tuath Day can hide themselves with the Feith Fede, or the magic mist, and appears to humans only when they wish to. In some tales, such as Baal in Scale, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, a king receives affirmation of his legitimacy from one of the Tuath Day. In other tales, a king's right to rule is affirmed by an encounter with an otherworldly woman. It has been argued that the inauguration of Irish kings originally represents his ritual marriage to the goddess of the land. The Tuath Day can also bring doom to unrightful kings. And speaking to all of this, speaking to the last part there about the ritual marriage to the goddess, reading a book about Cyrus. There was a book about Cyrus, and part of his transition to king, he had to be accepted by the goddess in a way that was almost sexual in a way. He had to be accepted by this goddess in order to maintain king. So you even see it in the Persians, you even see it in Assyrians as well. And David, you can probably speak to this quite a bit as well.
Well, in these visuals we see here, just in the name Tuath Day Danan, we see a verbal assimilation with the tribe of Dan, and also, and that one lady is styling there. She can ride her horse with a little snake on her head. She's styling, and there in the bottom left, this one goddess-like figure's holding the cup, and the Tuath Day Danan and the tribe of Dan. These legends overlap with the legend of the Grail. And they overlap with the European bloodlines who believed that they were from the tribe of Dan and from this the line of the Desposini, supposedly through Mary Magdalene and Christ. So these overlap here, and we're seeing together a coming together and an expression of this ancient story right here that you can see depicted visually so clearly.
Yes, and so to kind of further on this story, this is a video by the Brehon Academy. And this is just a short video about Irish mythology, and it adds a little bit to this. Now listen closely, because there's some really interesting elements that will be tied in later on in this show, because look, we're not even getting started here. Let's just put it that way. And we're going to talk about the scriptures that tie this all in. So this is not just mythology. The scriptures literally mention this stuff in a way that unless you actually knew about it, it'd be hard to see. So let's check this out.
The principal figures of the Tuatha Dé Danann established their otherworldly palaces, or brew, within prominent mounds, many of which still exist to this day. Some of the key characters make appearances as gods and goddesses in both the Ulster and Fenian cycles, sometimes taking the form of a divine parent or appearing to lend guidance or support to a warrior in need. But it's important to note that they are not worshipped as gods and goddesses in a religious sense in the other cycles. In some cases, human remains have even been found inside the passages of these mounds, leading archaeologists to interpret them as burial mounds, passage tombs, or tumuli. Sometimes they are called fairy forts, and they were known as Shi in the native tongue. The people who lived there were the Aes Shi, or Dina Shi, that is, the people of the Shi, or the people of the hills. And while we see here that the people sometimes called them Ondini Maha, or the good people, this was done so out of fear of the fairies in case the fairies might be listening, and not because they were thought to be actually benevolent. In some accounts, it is portrayed that the Tuatha Dé Danann, the fairies, hate the men of Ireland for having driven them out of their worldly kingdom into the hills, which draws a parallel with the fallen angels of the Bible and the jinn of Islam. Mounds and tullocks were believed to be fairy forts and are still called so to this day. These were the otherworldly and magical domains of the fairies. Strange things are said to happen around them. Animals would not approach them, for example, and people dare not enter near them, and farmers dare not level them because of the fear of the wrath of the Sidhe dwelling inside. Perhaps the most well-known of the Sidhe is that infamous Gaelic omen, the Banshee, which literally means the woman Sidhe, or woman person of the hills, a woman fairy. Her wailing scream is said to be a portent of death to those who hear it, but traditionally she visits only certain Gaelic families. Following the logic of the word Banshee, expert in Celticology and mythology, Peter Beresford Ellis, has speculated that the word fairy may derive from Far Sidhe, which would mean a man Sidhe, or a man person of the hills, or a man fairy, a fair Sidhe or a fairy, fairy. Incidentally, he considers that the word pixie could similarly derive from a reference to the Picts, a mysterious pre-Scotic race inhabiting North Britain who could be pixies or pixies. Regardless of what we think of all this, the fairies, which are the minimised descendants of the Tuatha Dé Danann, were thought to be real, and this had a significant influence on the beliefs and therefore the actions of the people who held to the superstitions.
So we even have stories of people that were killed because of these superstitions. There were actually people used to think that they would take their babies and replace them with a baby of their own, and we even had families who would kill their own babies because they would swear that this is not their baby. Somebody took their baby and replaced it with another kind of baby. Yeah. And this is interesting. Also the idea of these mounds, like you guys did a show on Saturday about Atlantis on FOJC, where you guys talked about these mounds and how you can see them. I mean, right down the road. We live on the Ohio Valley, right here.
Yeah. Yeah, that broadcast, Atlantis in America, we unpacked that very thing. And not that long ago, in Iceland, there was a construction project going on, and the workers went on strike and they refused to work because they said that they were disrupting these little fairy houses. Yeah. They were seeing the little people and disrupting the fairy. I mean, these guys quit. They said, no, we ain't doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's real legends and real things that are going on with these places. People who are skeptics that go there and end up never going back. Now, another thing that was interestingly talked about were the Picts. Now, the Picts were always, they called the tattooed people. They were depicted a lot of times wearing blue or being painted in blue. And these were a offspring of these Tuatha Dé Danann. And so they were kind of like, our modern day Nephilim, right? They were like a diminished version of that bloodline. Interestingly enough, these people, these blue bloods, most of the kings that are in England as of now come from Scottish royalty bloodline, which is where these royal Picts come from. Now, let's go this way. So a lot of people say, well, I'm from Scotland, or I'm this or that. You have to understand that a lot of these tribes, these people were tribes of priests or tribes of royalty in general. And when these people made it together, they made it only together. So you won't see too much bleed over into the average population because they hold that blood very, very sacred. Am I right? David, expand on that a little bit.
Well, that is absolutely right. And just like among the Gauls, and the Gauls were the people Paul wrote the epistle to the Galatians to, the Gallic people who, when they migrated to Britain, they become the Celtic people. And there was a ruling tribe. They were like a ruling class of people that were 1 foot to 2 foot higher than the average person that ruled over the mass of the people. So not all of them, just like John says, we're not talking about a completely corrupted populace there. We're talking about basically a Nephilim ruling priest class that's ruling over the mass of the people.
Yes, and virtually all of, and you see this, the Hindu god over here to the right with the bull, Almost all Hindu gods, actually all Hindu gods of any value, are depicted as blue. And the reason for that is because, believe it or not, and you can look this up if you don't believe me, but the Hindu texts are actually Aryan compiled scriptures. So they are Aryan in nature. And that's where they come from. This is why it's so valuable, why you see the same symbols in Hinduism that you would see in Germany or other lands as such, because of this is exactly the reason. And so continuing on, we're going to get into some biblical references here, because I would love to talk about the Og, because when I was researching this about Dan, the word Bashan kept coming up. And of course, when you hear Bashan, you have to think of King Og. And so we're going to dig really deep into this and see where this connection is. This was really interesting to me because I've never seen this connection before. Other people may have seen it. I've never seen anybody make this connection, but it's very possible that it has been done before. I can't remember everything. So Deuteronomy 3:11 and 13, it says, "For only Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of giants. Behold, his bedstead was a bedstead of iron. Is it not in Rabbath of the children of Ammon? 9 cubits was the length thereof, and 4 cubits the breadth of it, after the cubit of a man. And the rest of Gilead and all Bashan, being the kingdom of Og, gave it to the half tribe of Manasseh, all the region of Argon, with all Bashan, which is called the land of giants." So we know that Bashan is called the land of giants. This is very interesting. I've got a few words highlighted here. We'll talk about those as we go. I want to talk about Bashan. So in the Hebrew concordance, in the Strongs, is a proper name location. They don't really try to transliterate. They don't really try to translate it because it's not really a Hebrew word, but it is come from the Proto-Semitic word, which is Ugaritic in nature, Ugaritic text, which means serpent and dragon in the Ugaritic text. And this is pulling from text where the Phoenicians would have been reading, like in Biblios and areas surrounding that area where these words are used often. Og was mentioned in the Ugaritic text, as well as Rephaim were mentioned in the Ugaritic text. This was a common term at the time. This land was designated as the king of the dragons, the king of Bashan, and in Rephaim itself is a very interesting word, which I don't have pulled up here, but it seems to denote a healing or almost a coming back, and it means shades, it means ghosts, this word Rephaim, which is little different from Nephilim. Now Og is interesting because he is mentioned pre-flood as well as post-flood, and so Og is a huge player in this, the last of the kings. And this to me is very interesting, and I'm sure some people have heard this before, but I'm going to continue. Joshua 12, and it says, "And the coast of Og, king of Bashan, which was of the remnant of the giants that dwelt at Ashtaroth and at Edrei, and reigned in Mount Hermon," that's interesting too, "and in Salcah, and in all Bashan, unto the border of the Geshurites and the Maccathites, and half Gilead, the border of Sihon, king of Heshbon." And for those of you guys that have been listening to Now You See TV or FOJC long enough, you have heard about Mount Hermon. Now, Mount Hermon is the place in the book of Enoch where the fallen watchers came down in the pre-flood. 200 watchers came down to Mount Hermon. It's mentioned in Genesis 6 where the sons of God went unto the daughters of men and took wives of them and had children with them, and they became giants, mighty men, men of renown, similar to what we're talking about here with boys like Og, big boys like Og. Now, his bed was 9 cubits, which some people would say is anywhere from 13 to 15 feet. This was a big man, and the Israelites, Joshua and them, went in and took action on these guys, right? And they took them out. So continuing here, Og's literal interpretation from the Hebrew is long neck, and that's Strong's number H54 or 5747. And there's a movie that came out not too long ago called Avatar. And what is interesting about this movie Avatar is that these beings, these blue beings, they're blue if you didn't see that, they have long necks, very long necks. And I watched this movie, and the whole point of this movie is there's this world where these otherworldly explorers would love to come into, but they have to look like the natives. And so they create these avatar bodies that they can inject themselves into and live amongst these native people. This is the craziest part about it, is their god is, I believe, like Awa or Yahweh or something like that, Yahoo, one of these names that's kind of like Yahweh, right? But they create these avatars and they live in these avatars so that they can infiltrate this society. It's really crazy to me and really interesting. And there's other stories I've heard you talk about, David, about long neck tribes, etc. in the area.
Yeah, the Anakim. And also, you check me, Midnight Ride audience, but I do believe, and I'm not going to call the name because I don't want to misspeak, but I believe that the guy that produced this Avatar movie, he spent a lot of money trying to prove that they found the body of Jesus and that he didn't raise from the dead. There's a spirit behind this.
Yeah.
There's the spirit of Antichrist, the big, strong demonic spirit behind this whole thing.
Agreed, man. Big time. And this verse that we just read earlier, I've highlighted bedstead of iron. This is an interesting thing because for me, for some reason, when I read this, instantly my mind automatically went to Deuteronomy 44:3, or Deuteronomy 2:43, and it says, "And whereas thou saw iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay." Now, the kingdom of this world that we currently exist is this iron, this last kingdom that Daniel has described, where we have the iron mixed with clay. And if it's possible that King Og has something to do with this, this could be somewhat why this iron's in here. Now, there might be more to this iron bed than meets the eye, and we're going to explore that here in a little bit. Now, interestingly, this is something that Handmaid's Tale, this interested me to no end when I saw it because of the name. The Republic of Gilead is where this breeding center of this republic that is in America, mind you, is breeding these children because they have a problem with them being able to breed. So they bring these handmaids in and they impregnate them, these elites do, and they have children with them. This is really interesting. Now, Bashan was actually called Gilead. In many, many scriptures, it was called Gilead. And this is exactly where they had this. Now, it got my wheels turning here, as you can see, because I know that these movies and these shows are predictions and they are historical things. They are ways of telling the mysteries to those who are initiated in a way that they can see them on the screen. Even Disney makes sure to tell the stories of the fairies and the kings and all of these different things through their literature. So one day, when this man comes back, whoever this man comes back that is going to all these civilizations, he can be accepted with open arms. That's my opinion anyway. We're going to talk a little bit about this area. There's this called the Wheel of Giants in the Golan Heights, and in the scripture it talks about it. It talks about this area and about how his place can be found. Now, I believe if anybody were to excavate this site, they may in fact find the body or the bed of Og, and I really believe that. So we're going to check this out a little bit about it, and then we're going to talk about it. So here we go.
Circles of stone with a huge dolmen in its center, and the largest block here is 37 tons, but there's thousands of tons in total when you actually look around. And so this was a very capable people who did this. And it, some people have claimed, if you look at it, the design and shape of it, it's got this classic reconstruction of what Atlantis looks like, with the concentric circles, with the kind of central area right in the middle of it. So there's a lot to consider when you come to these sites. And I think it could be even older. It could be thousands of years old. But I want to get inside and go underneath and have a look, because this is where it gets really, really interesting. So we're already in the first outer wall. Now we're going to head in. You can see the construction here actually. So it's kind of like cyclopean construction all the way around the site. It's not beautifully cut polygonal walls or anything, but I want to kind of get in and see the dolmen really. Beautiful mountains in the background there. It's a big old area. So now we're heading down into the main dolmen structure here at Gilgal Rephaim, and you have to go right inside. JJ's been in already, crawl in and kind of do all that to see this giant capstone, which is just underneath all these rocks here. So this is the central, most sacred part of this very, very ancient site. So we're inside the chamber here at Gilgal Rephaim. It's a very small chamber, it's very dark, it's very cold as well. Strangely cold in here now. That could have been its purpose, to give this kind of sense of the chills. It could be haunted, it could have the jinn here. These were really chambers for the jinn, in my opinion, as well as being burial chambers, and used for other, things like ceremonies, initiations, and so forth. So it's really hard to see it.
So he goes on to look at that. If you want to check it out, it's megalithic-mania right on YouTube, and he talks about these things, and it really interesting stuff. And basically, this is, you kind of get the gist of what he's talking about here, but this is one of these sites here. And the reason I brought this up is because not only do I believe that this could be possibly at least a giant grave, if not Gog or Og's giant grave, right here in this area. And so moving on here, this is interesting too, because the center of Baal worship were started around Mount Hermon, started in this area. The first Baal, the highest god of the Phoenician order, is called Baal Haman. David, we did a show one time about tracing Baal all through the different mountains around that area, and this is why, because this is I believe that Og is the original Baal, and I'll show you why here in a second. This is a terracotta statue. He's got sphinxes and he wears a crown. I'm going to read this. This is from the encyclopedia. It says, in Carthage in North Africa, Baal Haman was especially associated with the ram and was worshipped also as Baal Karnim, Lord of the Two Horns. In the open-air sanctuary of Jabal Bukhornin, the two-horned hill across the bay from Carthage and Tunisia. According to the Greeks and the Romans, he promoted child sacrifice, likely in times of strife or crisis, or only by elites, perhaps for the good of the whole community. This practice was recorded by Greeks and Romans. And David, if you'd like to speak to this a little bit, please go ahead, because I know you traced, when we did that show on our Book of Enoch video commentary, you traced the mountains of Baal, and they're scattered all through this area that Og controlled, which is very interesting.
Yeah, and I actually did a teaching one time. There's like Baal Karnahim, Baal of the Two Horns. We see in Genesis 14 Ashtoreth Karnahim, the goddess of the two horns. And the Baal, the city was named after the specific manifestation of Baal that was there. And this gives us a consistent picture of pre-flood and post-flood worship of this male-female counterpart entities. And we know from, we've talked about in the 15th chapter of the Book of Enoch, that when these Nephilim die, that they become the devils that we read of in the New Testament. And like you said, these guys up here, these are the bad boys. These are bad bammer jammers. And in Psalm, the 22nd Psalm, which prophesies the suffering of Christ on the cross, in verse 12, it says, many bulls have compassed me, strong bulls of Bashan beset me around. That handmaid tale that's brought to you by the bulls of Bashan. The Avatar is brought to you by the bulls of Bashan. And I just feel like apologizing on behalf of the farce that Christianity has become in these last days of apostasy. I have great respect for many people that are uncovering the truth that don't even name the name of Jesus. I have respect for those people. You can get more truth out of many people that don't name the name of Christ than you can out of most pulpits on Sunday morning. I have no respect for an apostate church that does not care about truth, that just cares about their next airplane or their next offering they're going to take up or what they can compromise on to make themselves more profitable. And to all of you out there that are researchers that are not believers, I apologize to you on behalf of this apostate church. I respect you more than them. Do not judge the Word of God by these men. Do not judge Jesus Christ by these men. The truth is in Jesus Christ, and the truth is in the Word of God.
Amen.
We exhort you to look to Jesus.
That's so true, because look, these things have been right in our face for a long time, but been hidden by the church for some reason or another, and I think we know why. We'll figure out even more why by the time this is in. So let's take a closer look at Bashan. We've taken a little bit of a look. Now let's take a closer look. Here we go. In Deuteronomy 33:22, interesting number, by the way, and it says, "And of Dan he said, Dan is a lion's whelp; he shall leap from Bashan." Now, Bashan is an area where Dan was given, that area, close to that area. But also, when we look at the word Bashan, it could also be translated as Dan, he said, Dan is a lion's whelp. He shall leap from the serpent or from the dragon.
Yeah.
Can very well be translated in that way.
Yeah.
So in Genesis 49:17, it says, Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path that biteth the horse heels, so that his rider shall fall backward. Interesting connection there. You know, when me and David study, our goal is to go through Scripture. We look and we exhaust whatever word we're looking for. We find every Scripture that has to do with that word, and it's so amazing how these puzzles come together when you can do that. This is a great thing.
Yeah.
So here we go. Next puzzle piece. Judges 5:17. Gilead abode beyond Jordan. Why did Dan remain in ships? I think we're going to find out why, guys. And hit like if you want me to keep going. I can make this a part 2, or I can keep going. Let's hit the like if you like it. Forget the Pounders Pound right now. Hit the like if you want me to keep going.
You know you like it.
Oh, I know.
You like it.
We're enjoying it. We're enjoying it. I want to keep going, but it is. We can keep going. This will be a while. Okay, so here we go. All right. It says Gilead abode beyond Jordan, and why did Dan remain in ships? So let's think about this for a second. 2 Chronicles 2:12 through 14. Huram said, moreover, blessed be the Lord God of Israel that made heaven and earth, who have given to David the king a wise son, enduring with prudence and understanding, that might build a house for the Lord and a house for his kingdom. And now I have sent a cunning man, endued with understanding, of Huram my fathers, the son of a woman of the daughters of Dan, and his father was a man of Tyre, skillful to work in gold and in silver and in brass and iron and stone and in timber and purple and blue and in fine linen and in crimson, also to grave any manner of graving, and to find out every device which shall be put to him, with thy cunning men and with cunning men of the Lord David thy father. So Huram is a king of Tyre. He is the king of Tyre that was responsible for bringing Solomon the cedars. He was responsible for bringing him the gold from Ophir. He was responsible for all of that, and we're going to make this real clear in a few of these verses. In 2 Chronicles 8:18, and Huram sent him by the hands of his servants ships, and servants that had knowledge of the sea. And they went with the servants of Solomon to Ophir, and they thence 450 talents of gold, and brought them to King Solomon. 2 Chronicles 9:21, for the king's ships went to Tarshish with the servants of Huram. Every 3 years once came the ships of Tarshish, bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. So all kinds of stuff that they don't have around that area, they were bringing to them, right? These were the guys, they were like Prince Ali rolling through with elephants and stuff, all right?
And where were they going that it took them 3 years to make a round trip? Come on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
2 Chronicles 8:2, that the cities which Huram had destroyed to Solomon, Solomon built them and caused the children of Israel to dwell there. So he actually restored these cities to Solomon, and so the children of Israel could live there. This gets really interesting, okay? We're just getting started here. Now, we've talked about these maps of the sea kings, maps of the ancient sea kings before. These are a compilation of maps from the people that we are currently talking about. Now, they had control of an area, which I'll show you here in a second. They are the bringers of the idea of Hyperborea. They are the bringers of the wild beasts that you see in the sea. And part of the reason that they did this stuff is because they didn't want anybody else venturing out. And we're going to see why, because there was big riches to be foreseen out in these areas. Now, this is Lebanon. This is where Phoenician capital was. This is right in Bashan, Jordan area. This is where we're talking about here. This is it. I got it highlighted here on the map. All the way out here towards Spain, on this end of Spain, they controlled all of this sea here and everything past it. They actually set up the Pillars of Hercules to get out, when you had to get out of this area that goes underneath Rome and Greece and Italy, all these areas right here that they controlled, Libya, Egypt, Algeria, they would not let people out of this area, and they controlled the sea all far beyond, all the way to America even. This is why we find Templar symbolism, Aryan symbolism all through America. It's really interesting.
One quick little factoid.
Please, no, make it long factoid. Let's do it.
The place where Solomon built the house of the forest, and every 3 years they were bringing this stuff in, it was at Baalbek.
Yeah.
It was at Baalbek, the very place where he built the house of the forest. Yes, it was.
It was, and he had his groves there. Solomon had groves there. It was really an interesting area, but this map really gives you kind of a gist of what they controlled here, because literally all of these people that were being in the Middle East and even all of the people that were actually a part of Europe and Africa, they didn't know the sea. They had no idea. That's why these people knew the sea. They were scared. They thought they were going to fall off the side of the earth. They thought there was big monsters that were going to come get them, because this is what these people told them. And now Carthage mentions Carthage here. Carthage is mentioned by Plato and the Greeks as being the first civilized nation before the Greeks. They knew everything before the Greeks did. The Greeks learned most of their stuff from these people, and this is where we get the offspring of Apollo. There's stories of Apollo visiting the Oracle of Delphi, coming from the north. It comes down. He's the children of one of these beings. It's really interesting the way all of it plays in. And of course, Apollo, you can tie in with Baal and all of that stuff. And of course, in the scripture, Baal is the ultimate enemy of God throughout all of this. He seems like the people always want to go right back to Baal, because originally their Phoenician counterparts, which have basically the same language, that's what they worship. So they're always wanting to go back to that. This is why we have the bull worship that they did in Exodus. They put up the bull thinking it was to God, thinking all this, but this is where all this stuff come from. All right, so this is here we go. This gets interesting. The one-eyed shepherd. Now, we talked about some of this stuff. There's a video that I watched about this video. Actually, the video I played earlier from the Irish gentleman that talks about this, and he talks about one of these Tuath Denan that has got one of his eyes taken out, his right eye taken out in a battle, and his arm cut off, and made himself a silver arm to go into battle with against giants and everything else in the area. Okay, so furthering into Bashan, Lebanon, which we just highlighted here, this is how it all comes out, because you look at Lebanon, you look at Bashan, these verses start popping up. Okay, so Zechariah 11, verses 1 through 3, it says, "Open your doors, Lebanon, and fire will consume your cedars. Wail, cypress tree, for the cedars have fallen, while the stately trees are destroyed. Wail, oak trees of Bashan, for the old growth forest has been cut down. Hear the wailing of the shepherds, for the magnificent of the forest is ruined. Hear the roar of the lions, the young lions whelp. From the Jordan, arrogance is ruined." Now, this is the verse that continues to talk about the shepherd. There's like a parallel of these shepherds, and there's one shepherd that is the idle shepherd that leaves the flock, which he says, "I'll leave and I'm coming again one day," leaves the flock, has his right hand withered and his right eye consumed, gone. This is the shepherd that is talked about in Zechariah 11 and dealing with Bashan and dealing with Lebanon. David, did you have anything to add before I continue here?
Well, it is just so obvious. Genesis 49:9 calls Judah a lion's whelp. Deuteronomy 33:22 calls Dan a lion's whelp. We've got the true Messiah. We've got the false Messiah. We've got the true shepherd, the false shepherd. It is just so in your face and so tight that you'll miss it to your own destruction.
That's right. And Jeremiah 8:16 through 22, "The snorting of his horses were heard from Dan. The whole land trembled at the sound of the neighing of his strong ones, for they are come and have devoured the land and all that is in it, the city and those that dwell therein. For behold, I will send serpents, cockatrices among you, which will not be charmed, and they shall bite you, saith the Lord." Now, stopping there for a minute, we've done shows that talk about how Israel was involved in mixing genetics, creating these cockatrices by weaving spiders and weaving spider webs, and also the eggs of serpents, right? And these cockatrices come forth, which is interesting that it mentions here, and that's also mentioned with in reference to Israel. It says, when I would comfort myself against sorrow, my heart is faint in me. Behold the voice of the cry of the daughter of my people, because of them that dwell in a far country. Is not the Lord in Zion? Is not her king in her? Why have they provoked me to anger in their graven images and with strange vanities? The harvest is past, the summer is ended, and we are not saved. For the hurt of the daughter of my people am I hurt. I am black. Astonishment hath taken hold on me. Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? Why then is not the health of thy daughter of my people recovered? So just another reference here to Bashan that, in my opinion, ties in some pretty interesting stuff. David, did you have anything?
Well, I have here the Ante-Nicene Fathers, Irenaeus, and I actually have the book. This doesn't come from the website of Joff, the Humming Priest, but it actually says here, this is on page 559, this is on volume 1 of the Ante-Nicene Fathers. It says, and Jeremiah does not merely point out his sudden coming, but he even indicates the tribe from which he shall come, where he says, we shall hear the voice of the swift horses from Dan. Here he begins quoting Jeremiah chapter 8, which in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, even in the 1st, many of the Christian believers believed absolutely that the beast was going to come from the tribe of Dan.
And I can see why. There's a lot of things pointing to that. So Jeremiah 8, 1 through 3, this will start making sense. This is really cryptic and really scary in a way if you really think about it for the people it's talking about. Jeremiah 8, 1 through 3. At that time, saith the Lord, they shall bring out the bones of the kings of Judah, and the bones of his princes, and the bones of the priests, and the bones of the prophets, and the bones of the inhabitants of Jerusalem out of their graves. And they shall spread them before the sun, and the moon, and all the hosts of heaven who they have loved, and whom they have served, and after whom they have walked, and whom they have sought, and whom they have worshipped. They shall not be gathered nor buried, for they shall be dung upon the face of the earth. And death shall be chosen rather than life by all the residue of them that remain of this evil family, which remaineth in all places whither I have driven them, saith the Lord of hosts. Very cryptic, very interesting there. Amos 8:14. They that swear by the sin of Samaria and say, thy God, O Dan, liveth, and the manor of Beersheba liveth, even they shall fall and never rise up again. This is interesting because there's a denotation of Zionism here. Because we have Beersheba, this is where they call it the stone, the heap of stones. Some people call it the seven stones monument, the seven monument. And this is where Abraham and Abimelech made a kind of a deal here. Abraham dug a well, and he split 7 ewes in half, and they made this deal that Abraham built this well, and this is part of that, this oath of Samaria. Now, David, you've talked before about them that swear by the sin of Samaria, and I would love for you to bring out a little bit of that. What is your take on that? Because to me, there's a lot that could be, but there's interesting stuff there.
There's a text, and I can't call it, I can look it up, but it talks about in the calf worship of Jeroboam, it says they shall worship the calf and the devils. That is literally translating the word satire. And literally, when we saw those caves there around Gilgal Rephaim, you're literally looking at ancient chambers where these things of darkness were performed with the Nephilim. And you mentioned Zionism, and I have another one of the Apostolic Fathers here. This is Hippolytus. This is volume 5, and on page 246, and he prophesies that the nation of Israel in the last days would be ruled by the tribe of Dan. I'll just give you just a snippet. It says, this is on page 246, he says, for Judah was his 4th son, and Dan again was his 7th. And what then did he say of him? Let Dan be a serpent sitting by the way that biteth the horse's heel. And what serpent was there but the deceiver from the beginning, who is named in Genesis, he who deceived Eve and bruised Adam in his heel? For it is certain that he is designed to spring from the tribe of Dan. Dan shall judge his people as one tribe in Israel. And he goes on to spell out for sure that he's not talking about Samson, he's talking about the end time beast and the tribe that will take over Israel. And the bulls of Bashan are driving the bus over there for anybody that's paying attention.
Agreed. And I really think, David, through all this study, and I've got some more here I want to talk about, but I think through all of this study that I really believe that there was some kind of book or secret information or something found in the area of Bashan by Dan that caused them to go to ships and control the world.
And there, if you study out Elijah, there at Gilgal Rephaim, this is the very place Elijah was caught up in a whirlwind. And sometimes I got to kind of preach it the way I feel it. And I believe they were there having their little Nephilim church, doing their thing, trying to open a portal. And they looked over and there was old Elijah just taken up in a whirlwind right before their eyes. Yeah. That very spot is where it was. Yeah. And absolutely, we see and all of this is tied in the Freemasonry. The 7 sacred sciences are tied to the muses. And all of this ties into the recovery of antediluvian knowledge, whether through the emerald tablets of Thoth or Hermes or the 2 pillars of Adam that's recorded in Josephus. And this is the recovery of the antediluvian one world order that was launched again, like Mr. Hall said, from missionaries right from this place. And I think you're so spot on. They were re-energizing that antediluvian new world order, and they are now at the very place where they're expecting to see the culmination of it.
Yeah, for sure. And so let me wrap this up with a little bow. If it gets more interesting as time goes on, and we could go on about this forever, but I want to read an excerpt from a book that David actually bought for me. Is really good, by Joseph Farrell, called Babylon Banksters. And I think he nails the agenda in this. He doesn't talk about it throughout the whole book, but there's one paragraph in here where I'm like, this guy, he nailed it right here. He may not have known it, but he nailed it. Okay, so here it goes. He says, but there's another possibility one suggests by the scenario of a cosmic war outlined in the first chapter. This is I believe is truly the agenda. And it says, and that is, if the survivors of the once scientifically sophisticated civilization were ever to reach the pinnacle of scientific power and achievement that would have made an interplanetary war possible, if that is, they were ever to reconstruct the destructive technologies of their hegemony and extend themselves again into space, then they would have quite literally to draw on the full resources of the entire world and to create the wars and conflicts that drove technology's achievements forward at a faster normal pace of development. In this case, they would develop not only secret associations for this purpose, but money and a close association with the temples would be the easiest and least technologically sophisticated method to do it. And the political goal would be the same, ever larger empires, eventually to encompass the entire world itself. Now, this is interesting, especially in light of what an ancestor of mine named Francis Bacon wrote in his book, The New Atlantis. And in The New Atlantis, just like the story that Plato gives of Atlantis, he leaves the last sentences unfinished for a reason. Now, The New Atlantis was said to be America by Francis Bacon. So what happened in Atlantis, according to Plato and according to others, they developed this center where it was like the golden age. People were free to discover, people were free to do everything, very prosperous. All of these things happened, but then dark magic and dark works entered into the people, forcing the gods to destroy them. Now, this war that happened with the gods is mentioned in Genesis 6. This is the flood narrative where the giants were destroyed, where the sons of God, the Tuath Danann, or whoever you want to call these people, were taken and trapped inside of the earth. Okay, there are other fallen angels on earth as well, but these particular ones were trapped in earth, which is why all the stories, they don't know where they're at right now. They're gone, right? Some people say they went north, and I'm sure that there are entities in the north, okay? But this is what happened. Now, this new Atlantis was to be like the old Atlantis, to gain the prowess of the old Atlantis, but without the evil. This was the idea behind it. We do not want the evil because we want to build this thing worldwide. So when the time comes, when the purpose comes for a cosmic war, we will have every resource available to us throughout the world. And part of the way that they did that was going to civilization to civilization to civilization and building little Babylons all over the world so that their money system would work there, because if there's no civilization, there's no money system. And if you don't have people mining for gold, you're not getting gold. So they had people all over the world, especially in South America, in the lands of the serpent, land of the first serpent, just gathering gold, gathering resources, and creating civilizations, so that at one point, right now, they could harmonize all of these countries together, gather their resources. And what people don't understand about money is it is a form of alchemy, especially with the monetary printing system that we have now. You can create something out of nothing. There is literally nothing but confidence backing the monetary system that we have, that they were able to gather just large amounts of funds from all over the world, subject the entire world into what we're doing. And with that being said, I wanted David to speak to this "Don't Tread on Me" symbol. You spoke to that in the show you did, the Serpent Tribe of Dan, which I do suggest you guys checking that out to get more pieces of this puzzle. But this is normally on a flag. David, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was on one of the early flags in the Revolutionary War, and there is many similarities between the tribe of Dan and America. There are so many similarities, and I could even read a little snippet here. This is from a book called Beyond Science Fiction, Jim Wilhelmsen, and he talks about the similarities of Dan and the U.S., and I wouldn't subscribe or promote all of the ideas, but I think this might be worth hearing. Said, I would like to consider some of the similarities between Dan and the United States. The United States is the hindmost of nation empires, Jeremiah 50:12. Dan was last in the procession. The United States first had a flag with a snake on it with the saying, "Don't tread on me." That was changed to the national symbol of the eagle. As already stated, Dan changed from the serpent to the eagle in the same pattern as the U.S. The American flag was red and white stripes with a standard of blue to signify a new constellation in the heavens with 13 stars. Dan's banner was red, was colored red and white. The Levitical priesthood was the tribe of Levi. They were never counted as one of the tribes. In this understanding, Dan being one of the last tribes would have been number 13. You counted Levites. The eagle on our national crest has in the left claw, the defensive side, 13 arrows in its claw. Now, if we were added as one of the tribes of Israel after the dispersion, we would be the 13th. And the eagle's claw in the eagle's right claw, signifying righteousness, the eagle holds an olive branch. The founding fathers meant this to mean peace, and peace it does, but the olive tree is the national symbol of Israel. We could go on and on and on and on. And this is, Manly P. Hall wrote books on the secret destiny of America, where they specifically said that America was to be the springboard of the New World Order. It is time for people to wake up.
Yep.
It's time for people to realize that our government and our apostate religious system is being run by the bulls of Bashan. People are going to have to start discerning between the spirit of Antichrist and the spirit of God. This is essential to your survival.
It's super interesting, man. And you know, this, and to paint all of these stories in the exact same light is, you know, probably wouldn't be 100% accurate, because I do believe there are good angels out there. We know that. We know that there are good angels going and ministering to the people. We know that there are 7 angels of the 7 churches. We know that there are principalities over areas, you know, like the king of Tyre, the prince of Tyre, the prince of Grecia, all of the prince of Persia, these entities that are over the people, the Prince Michael, who is over the people of God, right? We know that they're there. We know that there are probably angels that are just trying to live in this world without it getting destroyed, so they're trying to stop people from doing stupid stuff because they want to live longer. They don't want to go to war with God because they already know what's going to happen, right?
That's right.
There are those as well. So we have a variety of different ones. But it's important to test the spirits if we ever encounter these entities, because the ones that are of God will profess the King of salvation. They will profess that. And so it's important for us to understand that, keep that. But it's very clear to me that America was created with the intention of bringing the world together again, so that when the King comes back, they can go to war with him. This is why we see Space Force with the goat on it, with the Apollo, with all of these things, because the war is getting ready to take place, guys. They're gathering their troops. I believe we are at the precipice of this, if not, maybe a few years out. I don't know, but it's very close. It seems like they've gathered world resources. We have wars and rumors of wars taking place all abroad. But the interesting thing about all of this, guys, is why so many Israel type things you see in England. This is why you see all this. So people always think, well, these are the Israelites. Probably, but the problem is the Israelites did some bad stuff. They did some things, especially the kings. They went together, they formed against God, and they worshiped false gods. Dan did similar things. I mean, they were the priests of the serpent. And so when we look at this stuff as a full picture, I hope you guys get a little bit of a picture. We could go on about this for a long time, but the facts remain that this story is a common story. I think that a lot of people get lost in where our civilizations come from because they don't believe the Bible. But when you believe the Bible and you look at what it says, it starts to make sense. And as a person who studied multitudes of mythologies, so David can tell you this as well, multitudes of legends, the only one to me that fully makes sense together as a full story, not just with now, not just with the past, but also with the future, is the Word of God.
Yeah.
All the other ones, they don't have an ending, just like Francis Bacon and the New Atlantis doesn't have an ending, just like the story that Plato offered didn't have an ending because there's a mystery there. But the mysteries can be found in the Word of God, and I hope that you guys see that, and I hope that you guys pick it up, do some searching, do some looking for yourself, because I'm telling you right now, it will be the best thing that you do for yourself, and we hope you do it. And David, that's all I have. Did you have anything you want to add to that or anything like that?
Well, I just might say this, that I think this is one of my favorite all-time midnight rides. I really do. I love it. It brings together so many things in so many ways. And I just might say this, and I just really feel the Spirit of God burning on my heart, that the Israel of God has every reason to be encouraged. 1/3 of the angels fell, but 2/3 didn't. We are on the right side of this thing. But Romans chapter 6, verse 16, know ye not that to whom ye yield yourselves servants to obey, his servants ye are to whom ye obey. As Pedro Martinez would say, who's your daddy? Who's your daddy? And it's time to get on the right side of this thing. It's time to get compromise and double-mindedness out of your mind, because we're going to win this thing. The Lord God omnipotent reigneth.
Amen.
And it's time right now to get on the right side of this thing. And I just really love this midnight ride. I just really did. I hope it gets 2 million views.
I hope so.
Like it, and we'll Pounders Pound it.
Yes, do it.
And on the count of 3, we're going to do the Pounders Pound. And you know you liked it. So you like it, you share it. It's time to get the message out.
Pound that like button.
It's time to get the message out. 1, 2, 3, boom!
Yes, guys, thank you so much. We are so blessed to call you our family. There's nothing better than to be able to come before you guys and speak, and to see all you guys in the chat and the comments. You guys bring us joy, and we're thankful that there are other people out there that are truly on the path and serving the one true King. So thank you so much, David and DeSalle.
And indeed, because of you all that listen and support the Midnight Ride, we know that we're not alone.
Yep.
And that's the only way we can do this thing. So, until next Saturday night, 10 p.m. Central, high five and good night, everybody, from the Midnight Ride.
And I stood upon the sand of the sea and